Good evening, members, and good evening to members of the public watching online. This is the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. Those of you who are observant will have noticed that we are without a chair this evening, and therefore, members of the committee, I would invite you to propose and to second a chairman to take the chair for this evening's meeting. Do I have a proposal?
I'd like to propose Alan Edwards.
Thank you. Councillor Benson proposes Alan Edwards. Do I have a seconder?
I second that.
Thank you. Members, are all those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you, members. That's carried. And I invite Councillor Edwards to join me in the dais. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. We do have a few extra guests here, so although we're not expecting a fire drill this evening, if the fire alarm does go off during the meeting, please leave by the nearest emergency exit and gather outside in the car park outside Runnymede Hall. Thank you. And as Angela's already noted, this meeting is being live streamed. So. Our first agenda item is, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillors Harvey and Wimbledon, and Councillor Dearson is substituting for Councillor Wimbledon.
Thank you. Okay, item 2, are there any declarations of interest? None. Thank you very much. Our third item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any questions or queries, or are they agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, item 4 is Treasury Management Update for the first quarter. Mr. Wasco, would you please introduce the report and provide an update?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a standard quarterly update which we complete as it's recommended by SITFA as part of their Code of Practice for Treasury Management. One thing I do need to draw to your attention is the recommendation. It's that this committee notes and then submits to Cabinet. Following publication, it's actually been agreed it will be submitted to Council rather than Cabinet. So if that could be remembered when we get to the point later on. So the report itself, first thing we'll look at, as normal, is the borrowing position. This is covered within paragraph 5 of the report and also within Annex A. In short, the interest payable has been in line with budget, and this comes as no surprise as all of our borrowing is at fixed rates. The interest rate that we have on the single general fund loan, which was to finance the purchase of the Knightswick, is at 1.08%, whilst the interest rates, the average interest rate on the HRA loans is at 3.11%. Outstanding borrowing at the end of the quarter was 4.95 million on general fund and 21 million on housing revenue account. At the end of the quarter, we did make a scheduled 6 million loan repayment within the HRA, which has caused our cash balances to drop. We have not yet refinanced this loan. Instead, we've used our cash balances that we had on hand to make that repayment. The reason for this is the interest rates that are achievable on new borrowing are broadly equal to the interest rates that we could achieve on interest receivable on investments, and therefore there's been absolutely no benefit to refinancing that. This is something that will be monitored as the year goes on, and should the council's cash position change or should the difference in the interest rates become beneficial, then we will look at refinancing at that time. Moving on, looking at investments, which are covered within paragraph 6 and Annex B of the report. During the quarter, the actual interest received was £447,000. This was £15,000 lower than budgeted. Whilst the interest rate on average that we've achieved has been higher than we expected, the average balance is lower than we assumed, and therefore that's had a slight impact. In terms of the rate itself, we did achieve a rate of 5.48%. Which is, seems quite healthy, and that exceeded the average SONIA overnight rate, which is what we compare to, we're at 5.2%. We expect that the rate will drop as the year goes on, as Bank of England base rate drops, and already new investments that we're making have already taken into account the 0.25% drop that we've already had in the bank rate, and the investments are already pricing in the anticipation of future rate drops later in the year. Taking a look at the performance indicators, the benchmarking, the first one we always look at is security. This is measured on a scale of 1 to 7, with 7 representing AAA rated high security funds. During the quarter, our average was at 5.12, which exceeds our minimum target of 4. This is representative of the fact that we are invested predominantly in AAA and AA rated funds, which are high security. Looking at our liquidity, it's in how quickly could we get all of our funds back. We're at 161 days in the quarter, which is considered as reasonably liquid. We don't set a target for this measure, but it's one of the ones that we keep an eye on because it's important that we don't lock all of our investments up for the long term and then not have the funding available on a day-to-day basis to meet our normal daily requirements. And as for yield, I've already covered that, so I'm not going to repeat what I've said. As a general note, looking at the economic situation, there's obviously a fair amount of uncertainty going forward, as I've just mentioned. We've seen the base rate cut by that 0.25% to 5%, and some projections of the base rate going forward show that it could be down as low as 3.5% by next summer. As investments mature, we're typically going out for 12-month investments now, trying to lock in the higher rates for as long as we possibly can. Those were all the key points I was going to raise, Chair, so I'll happily take any questions on the report.
Thank you for the report. Are there any questions on this member?
Thank you. I have a sort of concern on some of the figures that we've got, because looking at the annex, the Annex A for item 4, at the bottom there you show a range of loans for the general fund and the HRA in the second column, the 2 column. And you've got the totals there as 3.43. Looking at the same annex for item 5, you've got the same top figures, but you have a total there of 1.08. So I'm a bit concerned about the figures. Couldn't quite work out why they were different.
So the 1.08 represents we've only got one general fund loan, which is that first row, yeah. So it is at 1.08. The range of 2.76 to 3.43% for the housing revenue account loans that we have, and that is just the range of those interest rates, and they come out to an average of the 3.11%.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry, if I can't...
Oh, I see. I use the
totals.
totals. Yeah, okay. It looks like there might be an error in that total.
It looks like there's a typo or something wrong with those figures.
Yeah, thank you for the point. We'll get that corrected.
Thank you.
Councillor Dearson.
Yes, just had a couple of questions really for the audit team. There is, under the service activity, a Treasury management to assess the effectiveness of the key controls, ensure compliance with Treasury management strategy. It says work in progress. Do we know how long that work in progress has been ongoing?
It's been ongoing for a few weeks now. There were some issues with the finance team in respect of capacity because of the need to prepare the financial statements for the end of the financial year. That work's now back in train, so I'd expect to bring a report to the committee at the next meeting.
Okay, because it talks about the effectiveness, and I know there's some...
It does, yeah. We will be giving you feedback and assurance and maybe some recommendations for Lance and the team in respect of the arrangements they're utilising.
In that case, when we look at the report that's come before the committee for Treasury Management, would it be feasible to add a point in there, because it says to note the first quarter Treasury Management report and submit to Cabinet for noting? Could we add a note in there that says that there is an actual audit ongoing at the moment and we'd like to have an update of that at the next meeting? Is that a point for reference or not?
Yes, so Councillor Dearson, there's no need to amend the recommendation to accommodate that, but certainly we will make sure that that's minuted and therefore brought back to the committee as indicated.
Sorry, Chair, may I just come back on one of those earlier questions? I've just looked again at the data, there isn't a typo. That is correct. So it's just saying that when you look at all of the loans that the council has, be it general fund or HRA, quite correctly, it does say that the range is from 1.08 to 3.43%. Those are not totals, it's just the range of all of the loans when you look at it.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Huntsman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just interested in how the council actually deals with their investments. Is it done through? Is it in-house? Is it through a brokerage? And is there any fees? And if so, what is that annually normally?
Thank you. We do in-house, but we do have external Treasury advisors who are Link Asset Group. We have a contract with them, and off the top of my head, I can't remember what that contract value is, but it was in the region of about £7,000 to £8,000 a year.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? None? Okay. Given that there are no further questions, members, is the first Treasury...
Sorry, Chair. I think because the recommendation has been amended, it would make sense for you to note the amendment, and if the committee is content for that amendment to stand, then you can move it from the chair.
I'll take that advice then. So are we content with the amendment that Councillor Dearson suggested?
Sorry.
And the...
Sorry, this is the amendment proposed by Mr Wasco, which is that the recommendation should read to note the 23-24 annual Treasury Management Report and submit to
the council
for noting.
Okay, so are we, as a committee, happy for this to be noted and submitted to the council? Thank you.
So if you can move that from the chair and then ask for a seconder, please, Chair.
Okay, I move that we note this report to the council. Can I have a seconder for that, please?
Seconded.
Okay, and are we all in agreement? Thank you. Good to get through that. Okay, our agenda item 5 is the Treasury Management Update for the year 23-24, which is the full annual report. So it's back to Mr Wasco to introduce the report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So essentially it's the same report as the one we've just gone through, only difference being the one we've just gone through was for the first quarter of the current financial year, whereas this report covers the full year for the last financial year. It's all the same format, so I'm going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but it is how it's landed. So to cover the same points in the same order, starting with the borrowing again, the interest payable was in line with the budget for the year. There was no additional borrowing undertaken, and there was no early repayments either. During the year, the Bank of England base rate increased from 4.25% at the beginning of the year and landed at 5.25% during the year. But because our borrowing is at fixed rates, we weren't impacted by that increase. Looking on the investments, interest receivable for the year was at 1.977 million. This was £36,000 short of our revised forecast of 2.013 million, but it was far in excess of the budget that we had set at 1.2 million. The average rate that we did achieve was 4.59%. And this was lower than the SONIA benchmark rate that we compared to, which stood at 4.96%. This is normal because the SONIA rate is a overnight rate which banks lend to each other at. That means that it reacts immediately to whatever the situation is with the Bank of England base rate. So as that rate goes up, banks are reacting immediately. Our investments are at a longer term and we lock in. So we're normally behind the curve as the rate is going up, and then we're overachieving, as we've just seen in quarter one, as that rate starts to come down or is anticipated to come down. An interesting point to note, earlier on I took a look back at our 2020-21 report, and in that year we achieved a rate of 0.32%, an interest of just 122,000. So yeah, it shows the value of that increased base rate to the council resulting in the additional 1.85 million last year, a significant increase for the council. Moving on, looking again at those performance indicators, security was a score of 5.26. So as with the last item in the first quarter, again, it's reflective of the fact that we are investing in those high quality investments. Our liquidity was a bit lower at 101 days for the year, and that's considered highly liquid. The reason that was low is because we've been cautious to not invest for long term whilst those rates were going up, because with the uncertainty, that whilst you can invest, and there's some base rates normally factored into those investments, if it's going to go up and up and up and you're not really quite sure when, it's better to make some shorter term investments during the year until it does hit that maximum amount. And that's why that with shorter investments, our liquidity was 101 days. And again, with the yield, as I've just covered that, I won't repeat myself again. What I should have said at the start of this is, this report mentions it's for noting and then submission to Cabinet. But again, subsequent to publication, it was agreed it would instead go to Council. So apologies, Chair, you'll have to go through that again with the recommendation. But that's the report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillors, do we have any questions for this report? Okay. Councillor Reddy.
Sorry about this, but roughly how long do you normally fix your investments for?
We tend, most of them are going up to 1 year at the moment. In the past, we have gone up to 2 years where that was appropriate, but it does vary. So during this particular year, there was much more 3 and 6 month investments used.
Okay. Do you find that's easier then to get hold of the money more accessible for when you need it, or is it better to fix it for as long as you can for the year?
It depends on which way the rates are going, whether they're going up or down. So when they are, as I said, when they're going up, it was better to invest for a shorter period, so we weren't locking in at lower rates and missing out on the benefit. Whereas now that the rates have started to come down, we'll be locking in for the longer period so that we will benefit for longer as a result of that. When it comes to the day-to-day cash management, we tend to keep a chunk of our funds in money market funds. Those are immediately available and we can call back on the same day when we're needed.
Okay. Do you ever envisage or ever get into a situation where, because you've tied the money up for a year, that you actually need to borrow money at a higher rate because you've got your money fixed up?
No, we complete a cash flow forecast,
Okay.
which for a year in advance, factoring in all of the known elements that we have, taking into account average transactions with supplier payment runs, wages, investments that are due to come back and when they're due to come back. So we do look at our cash flow and try and make sure that our money that's held in money market funds, immediately accessible, is going to meet those needs.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional questions? None? Okay. With no additional questions in that case, can I move from the chair that we amend our motion so that we note this report and commend it to the council? Can I have a seconder? Councillor
I'll
Huntley?
second that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, and is everybody happy with that recommendation? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much. So agenda item 6 is the internal audit quarterly progress report. Mr. Barnes, if I can hand over to you to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. So at the 11th of April meeting of the committee, our proposed internal audit plan of work for the year was approved. And so this is the regular report to the committee outlining the progress in delivering that plan. Excuse me. Appendix 1 provides a status update on each of the pieces of work in the plan, but we always keep the plan under review in accordance with any resource demands the council might make of the team to address any particular challenges that are posed by the current situation the council faces. As set out at section 5, our previously disappointing level of sickness absence has much improved this year, and that's as a result of the changes to the staffing of the team, with someone who was on long-term sick leave no longer being with the team during this year. The work is progressing and being completed, so far about a quarter of the planned audits are completed, but there is the reports to be finalised in some instances, and I'm working with the audit manager to get those completed with officers. A further quarter of the planned work is in progress, and resources are arranged and in place to deliver the rest of the plan for the year. So given that we're relatively early in the year, we're broadly where we'd expect to be at this point, working towards our annual report for July next year. The resourcing section updates our current position, but I'm sad to report that we've recently tried to recruit an audit manager, and we did find and offered to a really good candidate, but he received an upgraded revised offer from his current employer, which means he's chosen not to accept our offer, so we're now having to go back out to advert again. Better news, though, is that we've recently re-recruited to our audit apprentice role, and our new apprentice started last week and has made a good start to life with the team, and I'll continue to keep the committee appraised of progress with that. In terms of the audit findings from the most recent pieces of work, the summaries of the three completed reports are included at appendices 2 and 3. The first of those is in respect of rent collection and arrears management arrangements. For this, documentation should really be updated to reflect the procedures that staff should be following, so that officers are able to understand and perform their duties effectively, and in the event that other officers need to pick up the work, there's clear guidance on how to do so. The team do undertake reconciliations, and these are being done as expected, but the quality assurance arrangements around those could be enhanced so that if a mistake was made, this would be identified and rectified more quickly. And the final thing really arising is the introduction of a service improvement plan, and improved consistency of reporting of performance indicators could help to drive the service to seek innovative and more effective ways of delivering the underlying tasks they're doing. And there's been obviously lots of changes in technology in recent years which could be being utilised. In respect of the contract management piece of work in Appendix 3, the approach isn't really being delivered in a consistent manner across the council, so providing enhanced documentation would support contract managers in this aspect of their role. Increased resource and capacity has already been added with the introduction of a procurement manager, and filling this role again will help to drive improvement in this area. Particularly through training and supporting contract managers in undertaking their role, and by receiving and challenging performance and other reports as contractually specified when they're actually in contract management meetings, and checking the validity of the data that's been provided back by contractors, so that there's actually proper understanding that you're getting the right information about how the contracts are performing, and making sure that's in accordance with the contract provisions. The final item this time round is in respect of procurement rules, where the rules are changing significantly as a result of the Procurement Act, and this provides the Council with a timely opportunity to update its policies, procedures, guidance and the approach it takes to bring these into line with the new requirements. The arrival of the aforementioned procurement manager helps to provide the resource and capacity to drive this work, and to provide the oversight of the approach that's taken in respect of specific procurements that the Council is undertaking, and that will help to ensure that these have been done in accordance with the requirements of the Act and the Council's expectations. That's my report, Chair, but happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Dearson.
So I've quite a few, to be honest. In terms of the first point where we talk about, the management of the business, I mean, it's a great piece of work, but is it, and I don't know if I can ask this question, but is it possible to give the committee a list of how many areas in the bank we actually, the council we actually audit within, and what that period is, and when the next audits are going to be next year or whatever, or would you not have that? Do you keep a complete record of the data and what the risk rating was and when the last audit was done on certain areas, or can that be shared?
So we do have what we call a bit of an audit universe in terms of everything the council does, and then we risk rate those activities in discussion with management about the situation that's being faced, and that helps to drive the audit plan for each individual year. But as I said, we keep that flexible as well, so as circumstances arise. So we can share kind of a historic things that we've looked at over the years. Obviously, what we're going to do in the future is not yet determined, so we can't really decide that, but we can look backwards if that would be useful.
Okay. Looking at the fraud risk on, so if we go back to the start of the report, keys out after a while. if we go back to the start of the report, we've got the fraud risk rating, and of the 27 items, 22 of them have got a fraud rating of that there's risk. One of them isn't rated at all, which is the GL. Yeah, and then there are some that are no. Could you give the committee some idea of how you got to your risk rating? Because for me, if I look at the risk rating, and there'll be one there under the risk rating. For example, if we go down through the various points, we've got just bear with me. Fire safety, to check that actions agreed have been effectively implemented and have been embedded into the day-to-day operation, and that's got a fraud risk rating by the side of it. I don't know if that's a fraud risk or an operational risk. I don't know what's the fraud. Is it that someone might run off with a fire extinguisher or something, and how does that compare against the fraud risk of, say, for example, an S106, where we know that we've got outstanding large amounts of revenue to come in, and I could go through others, but SIL has a no fraud rating, yet fire risk has a fraud rating. I just wonder if those fraud ratings should be amended to give us some idea of, are they level 1, shut the business down, level 2, need some work done, level 3, low risk?
Yeah, so the intention of that is to indicate where we consider that there's an element of fraud potentially within that particular area. I think, as you've just highlighted, I think on reflection, there certainly is a fraud risk in respect of the SIL area, so we'll review those in time for the next report to the committee. But what it's trying to reflect is that there's a potential for fraud in the particular area that we're going to be looking at, and we'll be mindful of that in terms of the work that we do. So it's meant to be an indication to the committee about that.
It's just we've got the transformation programme, then we've got fraud risk. Yes, I'm not sure. I thought the transformation programme was on. I don't know what the fraud risk is in the transformation programme.
Yeah, on reflection, I'd want to reconsider that, but I think fraud is now there's a really wide definition of what constitutes fraud. So that it's not just about taking money, it's a much wider definition now. So it is quite prevalent across lots of the activities of what the council does.
If maybe we could have some
I think
parameters around that so that we understand.
I'll reflect on that and make sure we properly think about whether there is actually genuine fraud risk in those areas or not.
Okay, then I've got a number of questions around each of the areas as we go down. Can I ask those as we're going? Yes, sorry. In terms of the transformation together, we've got terms of reference being prepared. Is it possible to put a date in there of when for completion of that, or?
That's just a piece of work that's in progress. So I mean, it's live.
Q3
it's very live at the moment. Yeah.
Q3, Q4, or
Q3? Yeah, it's actually literally in progress.
Maybe we'll just put Q3 in there. The contract management. If we go down to the bottom, there's 17 actions, but they couldn't see the 17 actions, and also there is no date for completion in that document at the end. Do we have a completion date for that? Because it says it's completed in September, which will be the fantastic work you guys have done to find out what errors there are, but it doesn't actually say when the work's going to be completed.
Yeah, so we provide a summary for the audit committee in terms of the high-level findings of the work. Underpinning that, there is a full audit report which has got an action plan with the recommendations and the agreed dates that those recommendations will be implemented by.
Oh, they just don't come here.
No, they don't come here at the moment. And that's
sorry, first time. So I'm just
trying
to understand.
Otherwise, there'll be an awful lot of information coming to the committee. So we try to summarise the pertinent points that we think the committee.
But that would be Q3, Q4. It would be this year.
It will be a piece of work that the officers are doing in response to the issues that we've identified. They'll be working on that from now, possibly up to 6 months' time, depending on what those individual recommendations are. But each individual recommendation will have its own realistic timeline that's been agreed with them.
Right. Okay. Performance management, the draft reports with the head of internal audit. Any timeframes for that? Or
yeah, I think since we wrote this early September, that's now with the business. Yeah.
All right. Okay. If I come down to procurement. There are a list of actions. Does that procurement, because under procurement, if we look back to procurement, there are a lot of things highlighted in the issues around procurement, including the fact that there are the policies, the procedures, etc., which is for Q4. Do they have any actual? Do you know if they have any actual procedures or policies in procurement?
Yes, there are policies and procedures in place, but they're out of date really, and
Really
the new rules are going to change those again. So, as I said, it's a timely opportunity, well, necessity for the council really to review those and implement so that it's going to act in accordance with the new requirements.
Okay. I mean, I might as well ask that question now rather than come back to it. One of the things I see across the whole audit is that there seems to be a lack of procedures in place across various areas. So I have concerns, and it says that we have some staffing issues. And then there was a point made about the fact that not necessarily management could take over some of those roles. For me, the procedures manuals are the piece that you should be able to pick up, and if no one turns up for work, you can do the job. So would it be wrong of me to say, would we be able to, maybe through Angela or someone, to ask all the teams to provide a report of what procedures are in place around the organisation, what the dates of those are, and then give the audit and governance team some idea of how many procedures are actually more than 2 years old. And I suppose my other question is, what would the audit consider to be a time frame for reviewing a procedures manual?
Our stock answer to that is that they should be reviewed annually, really, just to have a look at them to make sure they still are current and still reflect what we need to be doing as an organisation. I completely support or agree with your view that they should be there so that they can be picked up, and somebody else, they should be comprehensive and understandable enough that somebody else can come in and pick up.
So I think from that point, we know that some of these procedures are 2021, and I actually did ask the question about a particular procedures manual, and I did get a response that the procedures manual doesn't need to necessarily be updated because there are no changes to the procedures manual, and that the member of staff have been doing the job for 7 years, so there wasn't an issue. I think that's two issues. One issue is that if a member of staff's been doing the job for 7 years, then you can get complacency. If the procedures manual hasn't been reviewed for a number of years, how do we know that the procedures haven't slipped and that a member of staff, and we've got a key dependency there as well, because that member of staff, if they're off, then somebody might not have that 7 years experience. So I think it might be a worthwhile task for somebody to go away and have a look at those procedure manuals, see how old they are, and then maybe think about whether we need to look to getting someone to come in or whatever and look at those manuals.
So we do review or look at that as we go around the council. So you've got our audit plan for this year, but there's been audit plans in place previous years, so we have been round the building a few times, and we continue to do so. In respect of your comment about the sort of refreshing the procedures, I would agree with that. I think, as I said, I think they should be reviewed each year, and if they are still current and appropriate, that won't take very long. It's like a read through, is this still reflecting what we're doing? Yeah. And if that says, yes, it is still right, then it's done. But there's no evidence of that, or not. There's not as much evidence as we expect of that as
or sign off the senior management that they've actually been reviewed and they're happy with it.
I'd expect to see a record of that having been. I've reviewed it and it's still current, and we don't need to update it.
Yeah,
that should really be done, and that's what we recommend as part of our when we go around.
Thank you for that. Can I just, before we go on, can I just bring our CEO in on this to give a top level view?
So, yeah, thank you, Chair. Members, you'll be aware that our transformation programme continues as part of putting the organisation or restoring the organisation to good health. You'll be aware that we had a peer review by the Local Government Association a couple of weeks back, and that report is due to be shared with members. As part of the sort of the next wave of transformation, service reviews are being undertaken by all assistant directors, which covers every service area across the council. Part of that service review is to look at the policies, procedures and standing operating processes that exist in every single area of service. to identify from that a comprehensive list of all policies and standard operating procedures. And then from that to ascertain, therefore, what needs to happen in terms of modernisation, updating and moving forward. It is an enormous task. The numbers of processes at a very micro level through to the most strategic level are vast. So there is a significant body of evidence that we're working through that will be completed this autumn. And from that, then we will divine the kind of processes that you're talking about, Councillor Dearson, in terms of setting key performance indicators, putting in review processes and updates, overhauling old policies and updating new, and ensuring, as part of learning and development for our staff, that they are skilled and able to do the roles that are required of them. So it's kind of phase 2 of our transformation programme. Phase 1 being the physical restructure of tiers 2 and 3 and completion of job evaluation. Phase 2 is now the change management piece that is required to deliver sustainable long-term change and to future-proof the organisation. What we have discovered in undertaking this phase 2 of the transformation is that there are a lot of historic issues, gaps and other problems which we are now having to manage and tidy up. And you will see that emerge as a theme that we explored with the LGA peer team, something that we were very, very open with, and the Cabinet is fully cited on all of those issues. So you will start to see that coming forward, Councillor Dearson, and I will expect to work very closely with Internal Audit and this committee in terms of then the implementation that will come as a result of that phase 2 transformation. The other point is in relation to a report which is due to come to Cabinet next month around investment in a client relationship management system, which will touch all service areas across the council, and that will again allow data to be shared across the service areas to perform those sorts of prompts that you're talking about, to drill and report data which will affect our assessments of risk and our reporting of performance. So those are two very large pieces of work that we've been working on for probably the best part of this year, that will now start to come to fruition. So you're absolutely right to ask the questions. We're not quite ready to give you all of the answers yet, but it is very soon and it will come in the course of the next couple of weeks.
I have a number of other questions. Is it okay to ask someone if you think they're going to be covered by what you've just explained? Could you just say they're already covered, and then I'll stop? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
On the risk watch list, would it be prudent then to add into that risk watch list what you've just discussed, because there's nothing in there about procedures, or I think it should be added into the risk watch list?
I would agree with that very much so, and that's a key recommendation that comes out from the LGA, which is around the way in which the council manages risk, reports risk, and carries risk.
Okay, thank you. Complaints. I suppose I should stop because it's going to be the same thing. But under complaints, I think Oliver mentioned we've got that as fraud risk. But I'm not sure if someone's complaining about the fact that, depends what that is. But if they're complaining about a pothole or something else, or complaining about their council tax or something, I'm not sure that's necessarily a fraud risk.
So a fraud risk comes through complaints, Councillor Dearson, where people make false complaints or they try to claim compensation on the basis of false information. So that there is a fraud risk associated with complaints.
But I think we come back to the point that maybe that
it's the explanation and definition of fraud risk and the contextualisation of that. I agree that we can make sure that we improve that.
Councillor Dearson, while you have a look at your notes, are there any questions from other councillors? No, fair enough.
Sorry. We've got sickness, access to the robustness. I presume this is all going to come out of part of that programme, Angela, in terms of the fraud risk on the back of sickness, and Same thing, I suppose. I'm asking the same questions. Yes.
So in terms of workforce management data, sickness absence is one of those. We report on it quarterly as part of the performance data. And as Mr. Bond said, we've been kind of managing that through. So some of that is linked to improvements in policy, absolutely, because it's fine having a policy, but if the policy isn't up to date and it's not being used, then it doesn't do anything.
No.
So robust management of sickness absence in accordance with an updated policy has been the thread of the last quarter, and we've seen some real improvements in that space as a consequence.
Okay. We came down to licensing to assess the licensing applications are proven promptly processed and all due income is received. Is there a reconciliation of licensing?
We'll check that out when we do the audit. There should be, absolutely.
So when you do the GL audit, you'll check that out, will you? Or
That's part of both.
Both, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Sorry, no, I think some of these have already been answered. On the housing one, I think you gave a really good explanation. I did have some questions, but on the housing, it doesn't. I couldn't see again a deliverable date on that, but you've answered that because that was Q3, Q4. How we're ensuring that the GL is balanced if we've got gaps?
So what do you mean by gaps? Sorry.
Well, we say there's gaps in the reconciliation. So if there's gaps in the reconciliation, how are we balancing the reconciliation back to the GL if we say there's gaps in it?
Yeah, there's not gaps in the reconciliation itself. Sorry, I probably didn't articulate that as well as I could have done. It's gaps in the kind of the oversight arrangements around the reconciliations, so the quality control arrangements. So the reconciliations are being completed and are being done.
So
but what we'd expect to see is that somebody's then checking that that's been done properly and accurately.
Right. So the balance of that account equals the GL then, basically.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
If things don't balance, then there'll be reconciling items that will then be investigated and followed up.
Is there is there a significant amount outstanding in the rent arrears?
Oh, I haven't got that information to hand, sorry. We can find that out for you. Kind of
I was only asking because I'm wondering if there is a large balance outstanding, is there any impact on our year-end financial reporting, or is that?
Well, there is an impact in terms of reflecting the outstanding debt.
Yeah.
But that would be accurately reported, and the debtor figure would be higher than you'd like it to be. The external auditors will then check that that's been accurately reported, so you'll see that information flowing through as part of the financial statements.
Okay. Sorry about all this. The general ledger, I know we've got a book of work for Q3, but would it be possible to push the general ledger to the highest priority for Q3? And I'll give you the reason I say that. All the reconciliations are manual. There is no daily checklist of whether all the processes have been complete. A member of staff has been with the department for 7 years, so there's no need for us to update the procedures manual. There are no monthly metrics or age breaks produced which are given to senior management, including Angela. There is a petty cash account which is only reconciled once a year. I'm not sure how we reconcile that once a year. Do we do that off the back of loads of receipts or what? And I suppose another question I would have added is, do all the departments have petty cash, or is that one petty cash account and is it run off the back of suspense account? So I have a lot of concerns about the general ledger and the reconciliation process. So I wondered if that could be moved. My recommendation would be to move it higher to the top of the Q3.
Mr. Wasco, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I'll let my colleague comment on the prioritisation of that. But just, so I appreciate some of these questions are stemming from an email exchange we had previously. When it comes to some of those things around the debt metrics, those are currently under development. There's a number of different data sources for that, because there's sundry debt, housing debt, council tax debt, etc. So we're bringing together all of those different sources into a single dashboard, so we get that corporate overview of debt. Once that's developed, that will then be reported. When it comes to the reconciliations, our exchange was purely limited to bank reconciliations and not the wider general ledger. So I just wanted to make that point because I was responding on a very specific point, and I don't want the committee to be misled in thinking that's a wider point across all of the general ledger, just to make sure that we're clear on what's
cash
going.
and
On petty cash, there's a handful. There's about, I think it's 4 petty cash accounts, not well used at all, and they're very low value. I've got £5 basically. That is my petty cash account.
Right, okay.
I've had £5 for ever since I started here in 2020. I reconcile that annually, as do my return I have to do. In other areas, again, we're talking tens of pounds.
Right, we're not
there's
talking
about 2 or 3 transactions a year. Absolute
thousands or anything.
maximum.
So reconciling that yearly is very
Exactly.
right. Okay, all right. No, thank you. But would that be possible to?
I mean, we always discuss the timing of audits in accordance with the officers and pressures and challenges the particular teams are facing. But I can have a conversation with the Section 151 officer about that. I think it might be also useful if we have a conversation in terms of you've got some background intelligence there.
And
when we scope our piece of work, we do that in conjunction with the officers and with our own knowledge about kind of what the risks are in any particular area of activity. So if you want to feed into that kind of decision-making process, that might also be useful.
Rather than ask any more questions, Annie, would that be okay if I sit down with the guys and get some clarification, then talk to the rest of the audit team about some of the things that we've talked about? Would that be okay?
You, Chair, I would absolutely commend that. The upskilling of this committee in terms of its knowledge, its understanding, and the areas in which you can bring influence to bear, I think is really important. I might suggest that it isn't just you, Councillor Dearson, but maybe that there are a number of other members of this committee who might like to kind of join in that conversation. We very much would commend that, Chair.
Thank you.
I think I'll stop with the questions. I've got more, but I think I'll stop and then we can have a chat off record rather than sit on it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the questions. It's the essence of what we're meant to be doing on the committee, and thank you for the detailed and candid responses, which I think will provide reassurance of the level of work that's going into transforming the council. So, with that said, are there any more questions? None? Okay, so members, are you happy to commend this report to the Cabinet and note the report? Thank you very much. Okay, so agenda item 7, the Counter Fraud and Investigation Annual Report and the proposed strategy for the for 2024 to 27. Nearly said the coming year and undersold it. Mr. Deanan, if you can present that for us.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, committee members. What I'll be doing today is I'll run through the annual report that is what I class as the header paper. And then from there, I'll move on to the strategy, which I'll try to pull out within the strategy some of the areas that I think you may be interested in. I will then open it to questions. I won't go through every single policy that's there. The strategy is the overwhelming factor for the team, and all of the policies feed into that strategy and allow it to be implemented. Okay. So as I say, this report gives headline performance figures for 23-24. And as I say, it introduces a suite of papers that you will find at Appendix 2 through to 5. If I ask everyone to turn to page 3 of the report, at 6.1, you'll see the headline figures for 23-24. I don't normally just read them out verbatim, so just underneath, under 6.2, there is some contextual information there. So we saw an increase in referrals from officers and members of the public in 23-24 from 6 to 14, which is an increase of 80%. And we also saw a reduction of 30% from 10 to 7 of referrals that were unsuitable and not a criminal activity for us to investigate. I'm quite pleased with that because we have pushed on officers pieces of training, which has then obviously transcended into them understanding exactly what it is that we want, and we're not wasting anybody's time in relation to referrals that are not going to be going anywhere. The values of the investigations have increased, and that's obvious with the number of jobs that are being investigated by the team, but from 300,000 to over 785,000 this year. We've also seen an increase in the number of properties that were visited by the team. This is up 104% from 43 to 88 visits made in 23-24. And this has a strong link to the fact that the CFI team are working closely with the housing and the Essex Neighbourhood Policing team, in which we also conducted an audit of a high-risk area in terms of potential housing and tenancy issues. And it also lends itself to understand that we don't just end up coming across economic crime. In that situation, 2 referrals were made for Essex Police around the potential of drug sale and misuse, and 4 safeguarding concerns were reported to social services at Essex County Council. So our visits are not, although they are primarily there to target economic crime, we do understand that there's other things that we can come across, and we deal with them as we come across them. If I take everybody to page 15, which is the strategy, and this strategy is for 24 to 27. The strategy that was in place was quite grossly out of date. So when I've come into this position, I've taken a look at the new strategy. I won't lie to the committee. Counter fraud is counter fraud. Not a lot has changed dramatically, but what we do have is a particular area of work which I'll bring on to on page 18. But first of all, we're committed to protecting the public funds, and it's more important than ever that any losses to the authority as a result of fraud and corruption are kept to a minimum, and we ensure that our limited resources are utilised for their intended purposes. Our ongoing delivery of the strategy will be based upon reinforcing an organisational culture of zero tolerance to fraud and corruption, encouraging prevention, proactively detecting fraud and corruption, and the instigation of legal, disciplinary and financial recovery action against any individual found to have acted fraudulently or corruptly in their relationship and dealings with the authority. I think the best way to explain that is if everyone was to turn to page 18, you will see a diagram that has been placed into the strategy, and these are what I class as the pillars of counter fraud and how we would develop the strategy and enforce it. So right at the top, we must govern. So this committee here is reported to on the cases that the CFI team deal with, and we also keep a fraud risk register in terms of incidents that we see across different sectors within council life. This details MOs that are used, so the methods that are used by criminals, etc. So we can take learning from that register. Below govern is acknowledge, prevent and pursue. One of the big things that in counter fraud we have to try and get people to accept is that it will happen. It is no good saying to a counter fraud officer, I've got no returns, I've not got a problem, because we don't believe it, because fraud does happen. But what we need to do is we work together to prevent and pursue. Now what we do there is we complete a lot of training, and we obviously pursue those offenders that commit fraud against us. And overall, those kind of actions will lead us to protecting the authority from counter fraud work. The themes that we concentrate around is culture, capability, capacity, competence, communication and collaboration. The last thing that I would like to draw the attention to of the committee and the chair is Appendix A for this report. page 25. It's the strategy work plan that we've got that will underpin everything that I've introduced within the strategy itself. There are a number of policies after this, as you'll be aware, from the pack. I don't intend to go through each individual policy. However, I will open it to any questions that anyone has, and if you draw my attention to a page, I will do my very best to answer any questions.
So, committee, with that invitation, are there any questions? Councillor Benson.
Hello, thank you for the report. Well, I did actually have two questions, but you answered my one about the report says that there's 7 referrals that were not suitable for investigation, but then you explained how they are deemed suitable for investigation, so thank you for that. I did have a question about, so in the report it says 88 properties were visited. So how is it determined that the 88 properties are in need of a visit? Obviously, the cost of investigating this has gone up a lot since last year. So how do we make sure that we're not spending unnecessary funds on unnecessary property visits?
The cost of the service hasn't gone up. Are you referring to the 300 to the 7?
Yes, I am. Did I misunderstood? Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, if I explain what that is. So every crime that we get given, we place on our system, and at that time a value is attached to the possibility of that crime. And that's what that value is. So it's not the value of investigating the matter, it's the potential loss to the local authority. That's fluid in itself, but as we uncover other evidence, sometimes that goes up, sometimes that goes down.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
But yeah, the overall cost to the authority has remained the same for a number of years now.
Lovely. But how is it determined that 88 properties are, just for my knowledge, because obviously that's a lot. It's gone up from, what was it, 43
to 88.
Yeah, so how is it determined that you send someone to the properties?
There's a number of ways that we get referrals. So it'll be member of the public and officer inquiries to us. So people will be identifying that, for instance, and I won't go into the specific, but we get our intelligence from all sorts of ways. Rubbish isn't being put out at a property, so therefore is anyone living there. We also get members of the public to call up saying there are people living there and there shouldn't be. There's a number of people. However, the vast majority of this increase has come through the collaborative work with Essex Police and the housing team. So where we believe that there may be issues within the community, it's our officers that can help then assist the housing team as well as Essex Police in visiting the area and making sure the people that are living there are meant to be living there. So we conduct the audits with the housing team. And then when we find that they're not meant to be there, that's when we'll open up an investigation.
That's answered my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hunton.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned there's 2 social housing properties that were recovered. Why were they recovered, and how was that achieved, the recovery of those?
The process that a property is recovered is multiple. So what we can do, we can get it signed back through a notice to quit that is signed by the resident themselves. Quite often those aspects are where we approach a situation, the property is empty, and then we investigate it, find out where the legal tenant is, we locate them, we then speak to them and get the property back through that means. It's not always the best policy to enforce, but it's always available to us.
There's not actually been any evictions. You've not actually done evictions.
No, my understanding is both of those have come back through an NTQ.
Okay, and you mentioned drug use, and I've done a bit of research with our community officers on that, and it seems that's not enforceable because the police can't get a warrant to enter if someone is concerned that someone is using drugs in a neighbouring property. The police can't enforce that because they said that they can't actually get any, they can't actually enter the property without a warrant, which they will never get.
I can't talk to the level of evidence that the Essex Police would need to enter a property on a warrant, but you are quite right, they would require a warrant to enter the property. In terms of our referrals, the officers are present legally within the house, and that's through the audit process. which is in place within the tenancies. So they're legally on premises, and if they identify something there which can be referred to Essex Police, we can provide material and evidence to Essex Police to utilise. However, we do not then have the ability to go back into the address under what is known as a drugs warrant.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Horan.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say to your team, thank you for raising safeguards. So I have a social housing background and now I do specialist housing, so I completely understand how important they are to safeguard neighbours and the people in there. My question is, obviously with an NTQ, it's slightly different to a Section 21. If there was any lost funds through people sort of doing fraudulent housing, would we be willing to sort of chase them down and recoup any funds? And have we recouped any funds that we've lost so far?
If I answer in two parts, yes, we do have AFIs that are available to us. So that's accredited financial investigators. They are able to request orders of a court upon conviction. What I mentioned earlier, sometimes the process of prosecution is not the best option for the authority, considering the amount of time it takes to get through the legal process currently, as well as the cost itself. Unless there is a significant financial gain made by what we call the suspect, we wouldn't look to recover that way, because in itself it costs quite a bit of money just to get that process through. However, that option is available to us whenever we do come across that, and we have in the past, but not in the last year.
Councillor Redding.
Thank you, because you've given us a very clear report. Just one question I've got. Under the Counter Fraud Investigation Work Plan for 23-24, on page 10, the last item, undertake the SPD review. You've got it's not completed, needs to take place. What's happening with that?
At the moment, I've appointed with Rob Clyburn, who's the fraud manager. We've appointed a spot for Castle Point from Borough, who's going to be working through the NFI. Apologies, I need to put my microphone on. We have a spot working through the NFI at the moment, which also includes SPD referrals within the programme. NFI is the national...
Can I just interject? Can you explain some of the acronyms for the
I was just
people
about to,
listening?
Chair.
Thank
It's
you.
the National Fraud Initiative. That's something that the local authorities across the country, as well as other departments within government, all feed into. What this allows then is a lot of data crunching to go ahead, and what it does, it produces a number of reports. Some of those will in themselves be SPD frauds. Currently we have 45 of those reports that we'll be working through. Once those have been completed, because they're time barred by the Home Office, Cabinet Office, we do need to work those. We'll then go on to an SPD review with the appropriate benefits team.
Just one other question then. Do you have any sort of timescale for this going on, or is it just at the moment ongoing?
It is ongoing. We'd like to complete the 45 NFI matters in this year. We would hope to be able to do that with the benefits team, and then we'll move on to an SPD review. What that will entail is taking some of the longest standing SPDs and ensuring and doing what I've mentioned earlier, really, visits to properties to make sure that it's appropriate and no one else has moved into the property.
Thank you. I do have one other question from the CEO.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Mike, I think it might be helpful just to update the committee and explain to them your professional independence from the council, and in particular from me as Head of Paid Service, and how that role, your role in relation to counter fraud and investigation operates in relation to me in particular.
I think I understand the question. So please, if I don't answer it, please reform it. In essence, my professional position, I'm an employee at Thurrock Council, so I'm the Assistant Director for Counter Fraud, positioned over there. Now, in terms of investigation into matters that come to our team, they are completed independently. No councillor, no council worker no chief executive should be impeding or involving themselves in anything that we do. And professionally, we run our investigations along the same legislation that the police utilise, which is the Police and Evidence Act, PACE. We also have to abide by something called the CPIA, which is that we have to retain all of our data and we have to keep that in a particular way, and then also disclose that when appropriate to suspects and their legal services. Is that where you wanted me to explain?
Through you, Chair, yes. Thanks, Mike. It was just in really just to reinforce to the committee that the work of counter-fraud and intelligence, notwithstanding that it's a service that sits within the council, has a degree of professional separation and independence to the council, so that it can perform its role of protecting the council without fear or favour or influence by any member of the staff or any member of the council. So thank you for that, Mike.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay. We've got 4 recommendations on paragraph 3.1 of the report. Are we happy with those recommendations to vote for that to go forward? And I'm happy to move that from the chair if I can have a seconder.
I'll happily second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And a show of hands of those in favour, please. Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much. So that is all of our business for the meeting tonight. Thank you very much for your attendance, questions and the detail that you provided to us. Have a good evening.